Suppose there was an alternative to the human condition, a dimension of animal fortitude, where the river of time runs so shallow that an individual could stand in place against the current or rest leisurely on the shore as history passed them by. For a price measured only in spirit, a man could leave himself behind to live as a pig. If such a separation were possible, where would the line between culture and nature be drawn? What is the signifier of an identity based on exile from the self? In the hands of a singularly talented animator and storyteller, the signifier would have to consist in equal proportion of imagery and metaphor. In Miyazaki's hands, the signified is Marco Pigou, known more famously as Porco Rosso. While a more restrained critic might wince at calling this character and the film that surrounds him a cartoon, my insistence on using the term here is meant only as high praise. I have long worn on my sleeve the belief that cartoons, through the exaggeration of the literal, might grant lift to the spirit as surely as a plane might propel a pilot freely through the sky. The year is 1929, the dawn of the Great Depression. Italy trembles beneath the thumb of Mussolini. The Fascist Party has assumed total control over the voting public, if the results of the general election, held in March, were any indication. The government's next project is indoctrination through childhood education, which will be achieved by textbook censorship and a mandate to all teachers that they must capitulate to a fascist-approved curriculum. Across the waters of the Adriatic, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia enjoys a momentary peace, but the ripples of a war in the distant future have shifted the course of the fiction. The timeless tale of a heroic seaplane pilot must now be told in a place that was only ever once known as Croatia. Between these temperate coasts, reality ceases and romance is in the air. Romance not as in simply a love story, but as a parable of chivalry and the supernatural. The air does not belong to romance alone. It is the domain of surly sky pirates who prey on the vulnerable. Or they would, if not for the Crimson Plane and the pig who pilots it. Kurenai Buta, the red pig. Porco Rosso. Every sortie this high-flying hero engages in is another battle for the safety of the Adriatic Sea. He is a bounty hunter, a former ace pilot from the First Great War, and if he were human, he'd be seen as one of the last good men of the age. But Marco Pigou is not human. He is a pig, by circumstance and by choice. As he states himself in one of the film's most iconic scenes, he'd much rather be a pig than a fascist. Fascism in all its forms relies upon the crushing of the individual. For that purpose, nationalism and broad social division are used as tools to keep the public thinking not of themselves, but of what demographic they represent. If everyone behaves according to their station, adhering to a presupposed group identity and distancing themselves from members of other groups, the fascists in control may freely target and displace whole subsections of the population without fear of retaliation. Fascists have used these methods over and over again throughout time. Pigness, as defined by Porco Rosso, is not so much an ideology, but a pathology. The individual who considers himself a pig is plagued by doubt that he can ever return to being human. To be a pig is to be hyper-individualistic, focused primarily on what one can do best, and to find a smaller, humbler place far away from the big picture. It is certainly an alternative to fascism, to isolate oneself from the whole of humanity, and to allow the screaming crowd to drown itself in praise of a glorious future past. The conceit of historical fiction emphasizes the contrast between being a pig and being a fascist. For the pig is the protagonist of a fantastic adventure, and the fascist is acknowledged in the text only in the periphery. The rise of fascism is an element of the backdrop, an inevitable consequence of the times that no pig in a red plane has any agency to solve, regardless of how heroic he is in his personal exploits. There is a barrier between Marco Pigou and the progression of history, as thin as the page of a book, but entirely impenetrable. It is tempting to imagine what could be if this barrier was not in place, or if it could somehow be broken. If there was one more heroic man like Marco Pigou when the world needed him most, perhaps the rise of fascism would not have become a part of history. It's easier to believe that the hero needed to save a nation from itself is only one step removed from being in the right place at the right time. However much we might like to indulge in this escapism, the truth is that there were good men, hundreds of thousands of them, butchered like pigs by Benito Mussolini and his revolutionary fascist party. Why wouldn't Marco Pagot be one more pig in their eyes? When Hayao Miyazaki conceived of Porco Rosso, he could have become the author of new history, effortlessly altering its course. There is no set-in-stone canon to a filmmaker with ambition. Even cold reality can bend into farce in the process of becoming art. Despite having all the freedom in the world to tell a simple story of a pig who fights pirates and saves a young girl from a villain with no connection to our world and certainly no political baggage, Miyazaki instead chose to leave tragedy intact. The cartoon is forced into lockstep with the 20th century, and it is impossible to ignore how this affects the tone of the film. Porco Rosso is easily one of the funniest, most idealistic, and uplifting films in the Studio Ghibli lineup, and yet it maintains an unsettling closeness to one of the darkest chapters in world history. It is a glimpse into everything that is left behind in the wake of political suppression, from the perspectives of people who were never really there. People and one pig who refused to step across the invisible line that separates the individual from society. In the end, it is not made clear whether Marco Pagot formally reclaims his identity as a man or remains a pig for all of time. There is enough evidence to strongly suggest that he has achieved an honor even greater than being among the ranks of men and pigs. But to speculate about his place in history beyond the constraints of animation is to imply that there is a Marco Pagot outside of the fiction, and we all know that's not true. He is a cartoon in a red plane, flying freely among the clouds, and he'll always be there in that corner of ocean, a timeless character whose identity we can observe, but never embody. Farewell to freedom in the Adriatic, and to days of wild abandon.